On the afternoon of the 20th of April 1945, a secret operation was underway at the ruined Reich Chancellery in Berlin, above Hitler's Berlin bunker. At 2 p.m. Hitler had appeared from his bedroom in the bunker, and dressed in his greatcoat, its collar turned up against the chill air outside, the Führer, looking every one of his 56 years and many more besides, slowly climbed the steps to the Reich Chancellery garden above. There he walked with his staff to review a collection of Hitler youths who had distinguished themselves in the fighting against the Red Army on the Eastern Front, the Red Army having reached the outskirts of Berlin that very morning. While a decrepit Hitler shuffled listlessly along the line of teenagers and children, two of his trusted soldier servants were busy moving boxes. The bunker's telephone exchange operator, SS-Obergruppenführer Rochus Misch, had gone up to the Reich Chancellery for a smoke. Standing on the steps at the Court of Honor, an outside area, the back of the Reich Chancellery, Rochus Misch watched two SS men hauling heavy boxes into a waiting truck. Misch offered to help them, getting a fair idea that each of the boxes was extremely heavy, but not of its contents. The man in charge of the moving operation was a highly decorated 20-year-old SS-Hauptscharführer or senior sergeant named Wilhelm Arndt. Arndt, who was a member of the elite Leibstandarte SS Adolf Hitler, the LSSAH, had an unusually close relationship with the Führer, and one of Hitler's secretaries noted that Arndt would spend hours on end talking to Hitler inside his bunker study. Following battle wounds, Arndt had been declared medically unfit and had become a popular member of Hitler's staff, serving as one of his valets. He was assisted by another soldier servant, SS Hauptscharführer Max Wiebes. Misch recalled that each box weighed at least 100 pounds, and he helped load a total of 10 such metal boxes. Arndt and Wiebes then disappeared back inside the Reich Chancellery, only to emerge minutes later as if dressed for battle. Each man wore a steel helmet and had a camouflage smock over his uniform, each also being armed with an MP-40 machine pistol. Loaded up, the truck drove out of the Chancellery's Court of Honor and began its mission. Arndt was a key element in Operation Seraglio, a desperate attempt to move important persons and documents out of Berlin, soon to be completely surrounded by Soviet forces, and relocate this material and this personnel to the Second Reich Chancellery at Berchtesgaden in southern Bavaria, or the nearby Nazi leader's village at the Obersalzberg. These preparations were being made to ensure that when Hitler decided to leave Berlin and fly south to direct the war from the bunkers beneath his private house, the Berghof at the Obersalzberg, everything would be ready to receive him and his closest staff. SS-Gruppenführer Hans Baur, Hitler's personal pilot, had organized Operation Seraglio, mustering the remaining aircraft of Hitler's personal transport squadron, some 10 planes in all. Rear Admiral von Puttkamer, Hitler's naval aide, was given specific instructions to empty the safes at the Berghof that contained official correspondence, and burn them. He flew south aboard Hitler's personal Focke-Wulf FW-200 Condor, and among the passengers was Hitler's doctor, Theodor Morell, who carried with him an army footlocker packed with Hitler's medical records. The Condor flew from Berlin-Gottow to Neubiberg near Munich. Several other aircraft also departed safely for Bavaria, and a few also went north to where the German Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz had established his military headquarters in northern Germany. The question that often arises is whether Hitler himself could have escaped by air from Berlin at this time. The answer is yes, but he chose not to at this time, as he still issued orders to his hollowed-out armies attempting to effect the relief of Berlin. This is not to say that plans had not been made to evacuate Hitler and his closest staff should he have ordered it. Martin Bormann had seen to these plans. A large Junkers Ju-290 that had recently been added to the Führer squadron to replace Hitler's Condor waited on standby outside Berlin until the 30th of April 1945. Piloted by Hauptmann Heinz Braun, by the time of Hitler's death on the 30th of April 1945, there was no way the Tu-90 could have actually reached Berlin, as all of the airfields had fallen to the Soviets. However, the passenger manifest for this aircraft, dated the 21st of April 1945, has survived. 23 passengers were to have flown south to Bavaria on that day. They were Hitler and Eva Braun, Dr. Goebbels, his wife and 6 children, SS-Gruppenführer Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo, SS-Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, Hitler's SS liaison officer, General Berghof, Hitler's chief army adjutant, Walter Hüvel of the Foreign Office, the deputy commander of the Führer Squadron, SS-Obergruppenführer Betz, Hitler's new doctor, Sturmbannführer Stumpfegger, SS-Hauptsturmführer Gross, Hitler's cook, Constanze Manziale, and 4 RSD bodyguards. But in the event, Hitler refused to go. On the 2nd of May 1945, Captain Braun, now relieved of his task to evacuate Hitler and his wife, flew the Ju-290 to Königgrätz in Czechoslovakia to await orders. On the 8th of May 1945, the day Germany surrendered, Braun loaded his aircraft with 70 German women and children and flew to Munich and surrendered to the Americans. But of all the evacuation flights as part of Operation Seraglio, the final one has generated the most interest and intrigue. The small truck loaded with zinc-lined boxes, escorted by the SS NCOs Arndt and Wiebes, drove some 10 miles from the Reich Chancellery and Hitler's bunker to Schönwalde airfield to make a special rendezvous. Other trucks and cars had already arrived at Schönwalde and offloaded cargo and passengers. At the airfield were 3 large Junkers Ju-352s, positioned inside earthen revetments to try and protect them from Allied bombs. The airfield sirens had already sounded on the evening of the 20th of April, when the Allies launched a final air raid on Berlin, before such attacks would become too much of a risk to the Soviet ground forces enveloping the city. The Junkers crews had taken shelter until at 2 a.m. on the 21st of April the all-clear was sounded. 2 of the 352s were then pulled by oxen to the takeoff position, there being insufficient fuel left to waste on tractors. Then the cargo and passengers began to arrive and to be loaded. The Ju-352 was a strange-looking beast, a development of the famous Junkers Ju-52 tri-motor transport. Known as the Hercules in Luftwaffe service, only 50 were built, designed to make maximum use of non-strategic materials. Unlike the Ju-52 and its successor, the Ju-252, the 352 had wooden wings and an almost entirely wooden fuselage. An upgrade of the 252 design, the type had a large rear loading ramp for ease of access. With a crew of 3 and a range of about 1,000 miles, it was considered an unsatisfactory and inferior design to its earlier incarnations. On the 21st of April, 2 of the 352s were prepared for a mission. Loaded up with crates and passengers, they were to fly to Ainring near Berchtesgaden. The pilots were not told the precise contents of the cargo that they carried, but coming as it did from the Reich Chancellery, the Führer bunker, and other Nazi ministries, it could be guessed at. Commanding the aircraft were 2 highly experienced frontline transport pilots, Major or Major Friedrich Gundelfinger and Oberleutnant Schulze. Both decided to adopt different ways to reach Bavaria, Gundelfinger opting for flying at treetop height all the way to avoid roving Soviet fighters, relying on his aircraft's dark camouflaged upper surfaces to prevent detection from above. Oberleutnant Schulze took the opposite method, flying at high altitude and using clouds as cover. Any aircraft movement from Berlin at this time was extremely risky, but the freight and the passengers had to be got out under the Führer's orders. Schulze's plane carried less freight but 30 passengers, including people from the Foreign Office, the Propaganda Ministry and the Reich Chancellery. He took off successfully at 5 a.m. Gundelfinger's aircraft only carried 9 people, including the 3 crew members, but was heavily loaded with wooden crates and the 10 metal boxes from the Reich Chancellery. Such were the boxes' importance that Arndt and Fiebers accompanied them on the flight as an armed escort. We don't know the identity of the remaining 4 passengers, except that 2 were women. One was later identified as Elsa Krüger, Martin Bormann's secretary, but Krüger actually remained behind in the Führerbunker to the end and later escaped to the British zone of occupation. Only her baggage made it to Gundelfinger's plane. So what was in the boxes? We know that some of the regular freight belonged to Hitler's dental surgeon, Dr. Hugo Blaschke. The freight included a portable dental treatment system, files, treatment equipment, and dental x-rays. This included x-rays and dental charts made on Hitler and Eva Braun, vital forensic evidence that would soon be required if the Soviets were to positively identify the burned corpses of Hitler and Braun following their suicides on the 30th of April in the Führerbunker. Dr. Blaschke himself left on a different Seraglio flight to the Obersalzberg. As for the zinc boxes, which appeared to have been fireproof and securely designed to hold important documents, what did they contain? It appears that all the shorthand notes of what were called Hitler's table talks were inside. Since 1941, Hitler had had all of his utterances faithfully recorded for posterity by shorthand clerks. So a fascinating record of his utterances, opinions, and importantly his decisions had been preserved. Hitler evidently thought this material to be of great importance and had ordered his aide and adjutant, SS-Obergruppenführer Julius Schaub, to ensure that this material, as well as an unknown number of other important documents relating to the lead-up to war and decisions taken afterwards, be flown out of Berlin to safety in Bavaria. Schaub was the only person other than Hitler to have keys to the Führer's personal safes in the Führerbunker and Reich Chancellery, and faithfully served Hitler for 25 years. Wait a minute, I hear you say. Hitler's conversations were published in a book many years ago. Indeed they were, copies of the transcripts coming from 3 different sources. But there were other important documents in the boxes that went onto the plane that have never been seen. So important that Hitler was determined to preserve them alongside the transcripts. Hitler instructed Schaub to burn all the papers and material not selected to be evacuated that was still in the Führerbunker, and he did this with his remaining staff in the Reich Chancellery garden on the 22nd of April. Schaub would then leave Berlin and fly to Munich to destroy all private papers at Hitler's private apartment there. Then do the same at the Berghof, and finally with orders to destroy Hitler's personal Pullman train carriage. The fact that whatever was inside those 10 zinc boxes was not consigned to a bonfire by Schaub on Hitler's orders indicates that they were to be saved as part of Hitler's legacy. So, in the early morning hours of the 21st of April 1945, Oberleutnant Schulze's Junkers 352 took off without problems for Bavaria. But Gundelfinger's plane was delayed by engine trouble, leaving just before 6 a.m. Schulze himself encountered problems as well. The fuel supply to the port tank was cut, and he was forced to put into Prague, still under German control, to make repairs. At 7:10 a.m., Schulze took off again and arrived at Ainring at 8:30 a.m. Gundelfinger did not follow him in. In fact, his aircraft appeared to have disappeared. Gundelfinger's Ju-352 was spotted by locals on fire, skimming trees at Göppersdorf village, heading in the direction of the village of Bernersdorf, both villages in the forest close to the Czech frontier south of Dresden. Something had gone disastrously wrong. Gundelfinger's aircraft had probably been attacked, but whether by a fighter, flak or ground fire from Soviet troops is not known. His plane on fire, the highly experienced pilot was attempting to make an emergency landing in a field close to the forest. but running out of altitude, the 352 clipped the tops of the trees and went nose first into the field, overturned and exploded. One crewman, the top gunner, Unteroffizier Franz Westermeier, was thrown clear and survived, and one badly injured SS man also survived, dying 2 days after the crash. Everyone else aboard was killed on impact or burned horribly to death inside the wreck, its mostly wooden construction turning it into a raging torch. It has been reported that among the first people on the scene were Soviet and French prisoners of war doing manual labor in the forest, and they recalled the screams of the trapped people inside. Villagers from nearby Bernersdorf were quickly at the scene as well, and once the flames had died down, they managed to drag some of the unrecognizable corpses out, as well as looting whatever cargo they could find. Local police, and it is also reported members of a Luftwaffe flak detachment, arrived on the scene and cordoned off the area, and reported the crash to Berlin. Hitler was informed soon afterwards, and apparently went white with shock. He expressed regret for the deaths of his favoured staff, and said of Arndt, "I entrusted him with extremely valuable documents which show posterity the truth of my actions." Other aircraft evacuating Berlin were also shot down. A Junkers Ju-52 from Hitler's squadron that normally carried Hitler's personal baggage had taken off from Pöcking in Bavaria to fly to Schönwalde in Berlin. It was flying low, at treetop height, but in the vicinity of Jüterbog was hit by ground fire and crashed attempting an emergency landing, all aboard perishing. Returning to Gunulfinger's aircraft, what became of the Führer's 10 boxes? This is the million-dollar question, and would lead to a multi-million-dollar fraud. Various investigations of the Bernersdorf area have turned up quite a collection of artifacts in the homes of local residents. Many metal and glass parts of the plane that survived the fire ended up incorporated into buildings, including plain windows that form part of a chicken coop. A total of 4,711 vials, porcelain shards, molten silver and dental equipment were recovered, showing that Dr. Blaschke's dental equipment was aboard, as reported, plus lots of baggage belonging to passengers. It was also reported that Julius Schaub's personal seal was discovered intact, confirming that the documents that Hitler stated were of great historic importance were aboard the aircraft. Several of the passengers were never identified, including 2 women, leading to the mix-up about Bormann's secretary, Elsa Krüger. She actually survived the war, marrying the British officer who interrogated her and living at Wallasey in Cheshire near Liverpool. She died in 2005. As mentioned, the loss of the dental charts and X-rays of Hitler and Eva Braun complicated greatly Soviet efforts to positively identify the charred and unrecognizable corpses they discovered in a shell crater near the Führerbunker's emergency exit in early May 1945, fueling suspicions that Hitler somehow escaped. Returning to the 10 metal boxes laden with files, several explanations have been mooted by journalists and historians who investigated the Bernersdorf crash. Villagers interviewed after the war reported salvaging crates. They also reported that some carried important Nazi seals. They said that SS arrived some hours after the crash, demanded the crates and took them away, and they were never seen again. Other indications are that some of the crates and metal boxes were hidden by villagers who were searching for items of value. Likewise, these containers have never been seen again. Another scenario has the crates being located in Bernersdorf by the East German authorities in the late 1940s or early 1950s. The Stasi, the East German secret police, took them away. But this theory is rather weak, as after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of East Germany in 1989-90, no boxes of secret Hitler documents emerged from the East German archives. However, there was a co-theory that explained the documents' disappearance. They were smuggled out of East Germany and sold piecemeal to collectors to raise money for the East German communist authorities. This was the basis of the Hitler Diaries fraud, when East German forger Konrad Kujau began selling diary volumes supposedly written by Adolf Hitler. Kujau said he had obtained them from a corrupt East German general, who had got them from boxes retrieved at the Bernersdorf crash site. In 1983, the diaries completely fooled the famous German magazine Stern, which ended up paying $3.7 million for them, and which were authenticated by none other than the respectable British historian and World War II intelligence officer Hugh Trevor Roper, who had actually investigated Hitler's demise on the ground in Germany after the war. He had written what was considered by many to be the definitive story of Hitler's death. The Hitler Diaries fraud was eventually publicly exposed, and several people ended up in jail. But the affair of the Hitler Diaries has diverted attention from the search for the real boxes of documents that were on board the Ju-352 that crashed on the 21st of April 1945. It remains a fact that to all intents and purposes, this archive of extremely valuable material has disappeared into thin air. Perhaps some of these boxes remain concealed in the Bernersdorf area, hidden under barns or chicken coops. Perhaps the SS did take the boxes away, and they destroyed them at war's end to prevent their capture. Perhaps an archivist removed this material from some storage facility when East Germany collapsed. Perhaps they were sold off to collectors, who have remained quite silent about their purchases ever since. For example, Julius Schaub, who arrived at the Berghof, Hitler's mountain house, on the 26th of April 1945 with orders to burn Hitler's private correspondence, found the Obersalzberg to be a moonscape following a British air raid. The Berghof was badly damaged. According to witnesses, instead of burning documents, Schaub helped himself to choice documents and after the war sold them on to collectors to help support himself. The contents of the metal boxes have followed an assortment of Hitler-related documents and personal letters that have simply disappeared, many of these items ending up in veterans' attics, private collections and libraries all over the United States and Europe. We can speculate on this forever, but of one thing we can be sure: some or all of these well-made metal boxes survived the plane crash. The hunt for them continues. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.